Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are. It's breakfast somewhere, so eat up. Welcome to Breakfast with Vinny. Food for thought. Hey, Mark, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming and doing this.
Oh, my pleasure, Vinny. What are you serving for breakfast, man?
Whatever you want, eggs are in fashion these days again,
I know. I'm on eggs myself,
Good, good stuff. So by the way, breakfast is served all day.
Oh, that's the best news yet.
You know, there was a place.
Hard to find a
Yeah,
place where breakfast is served all day.
I know. I'll tell you something. I'm one of those people that can eat breakfast anytime. There used to be a place in the San Fernando Valley called the Good Earth. It was like
Oh
right
yeah.
around Laurel Canyon. Yeah, there was one on Laurel Canyon and Ventura, and I would go in there like 9 o'clock, 9:30 at night. I'd order, bacon, eggs, pancakes.
Sounds perfect.
Yeah, yeah, anytime, any old time.
Yeah.
So, but anyway, it's great to see you again, my friend. And
Likewise.
man, oh man, I mean, I could sit here forever and pick your brain. Believe me, it's really something else. When I think about you, just on a musical level, it's so vast, and I don't really know where to start. But I will start on what may seem like an atypical level. Like I just have to know because I'm looking at a big picture here. I'd like to know first of all, Mark, really, what got you into music? What attracted you to music initially? To the point where you said, I'm gonna be a musician, you know.
Well, I think, and I consider myself lucky in this respect that there was really never any choice. It was there from day one. As I like to say to my kids, I had no plan B. There was really nothing to fall back on. It was music or really, I don't know what. I really don't. Both of my parents were musicians. My mother, an actual professional. She was a violinist and played in symphony orchestras and chamber groups all over the world, actually. And so there was music in the house from day one. Now, both of them were classical musicians. So I had a very unnormal background growing up with music because I didn't even know what pop music was. I mean, I sort of heard it out in life, and friends,
Mhm.
would talk about the Beach Boys or the Beatles when they came out, and I was interested in Mahler Symphony and the Haydn Trumpet Concerto, stuff like that. My mother stuck a violin in my hand when I was very young, and I enjoyed it, but it was not my choice. I played the recorder for a little bit because there was a recorder ensemble at school. But I remember she would drag me to her orchestra rehearsals. No babysitters here. You would come to the rehearsal. You'd sit in the auditorium and do your homework while she rehearsed with the orchestra. And and I remember finishing my homework one day and going to the back of the hall and sort of sneaking around behind the orchestra and saw these guys back there, the brass players, man. And they had the meatball sandwiches next to the stand and they were sitting back there and they wouldn't do anything for a long time. Then all of a sudden they go, ah, and it was so cool. And then I
Wow.
heard the clarino trumpet, the Bach, uh, the way he wrote for trumpet. And then in the Bach's days, they were called the clarino. And it sent chills down my arm. To this day, it still does. And between those two moments, I said, I want to create that sensation. That sensation is so cool to me that I would like to create that sensation for others. So I told my mother, I want to play trumpet. And she said, all right, you can play trumpet, but you have to play violin too. So for a year, I played trumpet and violin. And then I played the Haydn Trumpet Concerto uh, when I was like 12 or 13 or something. And she said, all right, you can play trumpet.
Wow.
And that
But
really
you yeah.
sort of marked it for me, that music had been there. I've loved fooling around on the piano and just making up stories and banging on the piano. I hated piano lessons. I'm not really a performing piano player, but I am a composing piano player. I get around enough on the instrument to compose.
Mhm.
But it was just there. It was there from day one, and I've never questioned it, and I've always just tried to figure out the new invention to keep gainfully employed, you know?
Right, right. No, I understand what you're saying about no plan B. It was the same for me. When I got hit over the head with my epiphany of this is what I'm going to do, I just thought there's no turning back, you know.
Yeah.
So you have that laser focus. So how when this happened, how old were you when you started studying the trumpet?
I was in 4th grade, so what is that? 12?
Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah, something like that. Yeah, or
11, 12.
earlier than that, I think. So
Yeah,
17, yeah. Well, that's young, yeah.
yeah,
Great. So, it's interesting because you were saying that, you were around this classical environment, rather than most people being, exposed to, just AM pop radio and, the hits of the day and that sort of thing. But what I find interesting is that back, at that time, I think that, that sort of exposure to that for the masses, I think was much more accessible. I mean, I remember when I was a kid, I think that those days are long gone, in terms of what the public
yeah.
gets. So you were really blessed and you were born into it pretty much, you know?
Very much so, and really an extraordinary opportunity as a kid. I mean,
Yeah.
we lived in New York City, and so I would get, like I say, dragged to just orchestra rehearsal after orchestra rehearsal. My
Amazing.
mother took us to see the Berlin Philharmonic at Carnegie Hall when I was a kid. I mean, and then we moved to Harper College in New York, Upper New York State, and I remember seeing like um, Merce Cunningham and John Cage, for instance, came and gave a performance. So I mean, and you, I might have been 13 or 14, and at the time I said, I don't know what the hell's going on. This is strange, but I knew it was iconic moment here that something important, very different was being done by these guys, and that I should take note. And I can look back now and say, yeah, I actually saw John Cage play, you know, his piano music in a concert hall when and so I have
Wow.
experiences like that in my background, which, is invaluable, really, really invaluable.
I agree. I agree. That's amazing.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, on a similar note again, I'm only saying this because it just reminds me of, the things that I was exposed to as well. Just, hearing the Don Ellis orchestra, when I was like 14, 15 years old, just being exposed to all that kind of stuff as well as all the sort of seminal music that was being created back at that time. And but being directly thrust into that environment, that's absolutely invaluable. So
Yeah.
then, but being brought up in a classical environment like that, I'd love to be able to trace the progression of your musical development and the sort of road that it took and roads, because there are several, in terms of you then, becoming exposed to jazz
Right.
and becoming a performer, and then a composer and then a film composer. I wanna sort of see what informed what came first, the chicken or the egg, how you sort you know what I mean? Because,
Yeah, absolutely.
yeah, because when
Absolutely.
you and I met, we were playing jazz gigs, at the Baked Potato in Pasadena, right?
Yeah.
And yeah,
Yeah.
so yeah.
Well, I think one of the things, the moment for me was we were living in mid New York State. My parents were teaching at Harper College there,
Mm,
and my dad got an offer to teach at San Francisco State University, and he took the gig. So it now living in mid New York State in a college environment, yes, I was exposed to things like John Cage and college musicals, but my parents at home were still playing Haydn string quartets on the weekends with their friends. My mother would turn on the Mahler symphonies at night, before bed. I still, my friends would talk about the Beach Boys, but I had never really experienced any of that, you know. So I come out of that environment and I move into Marin County in San Francisco. And I'm at that transition period where you're sort of revolting from your parents anyway, you know. And so, sort of in my loneliness, I'm scanning over the radio in this new city, in this new town with no friends, and I come across a jazz station. Now, there had been no net jazz station in mid-state New York, so I had never really been exposed to jazz. Jazz to me was the high school stage band, a big band, right?
Right.
And yes, there are
Sure.
some decent charts in there, but that's not the world of jazz. I mean, it's a little tiny corner of it, and I loved it. I loved being in the stage band. I
Mhm.
love this other type of music. All of a sudden, I'm listening to Miles. I'm listening to Monk. I'm listening to Art Blakey, and I'm listening to Don Ellis. You bring up Don Ellis, right? And I go, "Holy shit, what is this?" And it completely changed my life. And it was, of course, Miles who, for me, the trumpet had been this heroic instrument at the back of the orchestra or leading the Bach chorale with the beautiful clarino trumpets. All of a sudden, you put a mute in that same instrument and you whisper into the mic, and you're sexy and you're sensual and you're a whole nother vocabulary out of the same bloody instrument. And I went, well, this is for me. Are you kidding? I can do
Wow.
both those things on the same instrument. Let me just dive in. And so I just threw myself in hook, line, and sinker and started buying records. I would, as soon as I had a license, I would drive into town to Tower Records and I'd save up my allowance and buy the new releases. And I would start asking my parents, I'm still underage, so can you take me to Basin Street West? I want to hear Don Ellis. I very clearly went to see Don because here's a trumpet player who's playing with electronics, who's exploring all this interesting stuff. And that was it. Now, I'm older than Winton. Winton hadn't arrived on the scene yet. So I had no model that told me you can do both, that you can be a virtuoso classical musician and a virtuoso jazz musician. So I sort of made the decision at one point to leave the classical world behind. Do I have any regrets? Not really. I mean, it's because I found a couple of other worlds that I wanted to explore just as ravenously. And I think a classical expertise on an instrument takes a dedication that would have probably not allowed me to explore electronics and composition to the level I have. So at some point in my early 20s, I stopped taking those orchestral gigs, but I had really cool gigs. I worked a season with Seiji Ozawa in the San Francisco Symphony. I was third trumpet player under Carlos Chavez in the Cabrillo Festival Orchestra. I played the Bach B minor mass, first trumpet in the Bach B minor mass from the Bach Society. I've experienced the world of first chair classical trumpet player, and I decided at some point I really want the jazz. I want the jazz life. I want the jazz world. And I had discovered electronics. And then this whole world just opened up for me. And by my early 20s, that's those two paths became the strong paths for me to follow.
Mhm. I understand. You think that, Don Ellis may have been one of the first, people also being a trumpet player and a band leader and a composer that was experimenting with electronics that gave you that first exposure to using electronics in that kind of context?
Don Ellis and Miles. I mean, Miles plugged in a wah wah
Right,
pedal. I remember seeing John Clemmer with an Echoplex on his saxophone.
right, right.
And then, of course, Don Ellis had the Echoplex, and he had
Mhm.
ring modulator. I think he had, and I mean, Don was a remarkable uh, artist. I mean, he was capable of so much, and his loss at such an early age was just so tragic. Because who knows what he could have done? I mean, he was breaking boundaries everywhere he turned. Um, so he was a huge influence on me. But Miles was always, you know,
Yeah.
the ability to have that clear a vision of a brand new world the way that Miles always has and to keep exploring. I've still to this day, I go back and listen to the transitions that he's made on certain records and it's so inspiring. It's just so
Well,
inspiring.
absolutely, he's one of one,
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and so well said, and I mean, you can't argue with that. His influence was so monumental, is still so monumental,
Yeah.
and, it's interesting because at also at that time, I think that, synthesis and I mean, switched on Bach, remember that? You
Oh,
know?
absolutely.
Yeah, and then Herbie and all these people were sort of, getting into the whole synthesis thing as well, and I think that at that time, even though it was a national thing that was forming, it's interesting because all those guys used that stuff. It worked for them. They weren't working for it, you know? It wasn't the other way around at that point yet,
Yeah,
which is kind of a beautiful thing.
yeah,
And if we can keep it that way, great. But right. And you talked about being in the Bay Area. I remember when I first came to California, somehow I don't know what happened. I was in some rental vehicle or something, and I turned on the AM radio, not FM, AM,
right.
during the daytime. Okay. And guess what came on? Miles.
Wow.
I must have
Wow, wow.
stumbled across some jazz station. Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, there, you know what I mean? And I was thinking to myself when you said that, I thought, I wonder if it was that same station or if it was, if it was an FM station, but that kind of stuff was rampant then. And
Yeah,
so, all right. So that you definitely got bit really bad with the jazz bug and the rest
yeah,
is history. So you then, and, cause I remember, um, like around when I was still in Frank Zappa's band, you and I talked and you were doing Group 87. And
yeah,
so, I may be jumping ahead a little bit here because we're talking about Miles and Don Ellis and the sort of marriage of jazz and electronica. But at the same time, you you were doing that and I think that I'm justified justified in saying that you, in my opinion, seem to have had a singular kind of different uh, vision than anything else that I was used to hearing at that time. So, if I may pat you on the back here, I would say that you sort of opened up another door.
yeah,
Um, Speaking of a genre ish kind of thing where I hadn't really heard anything like it. And I don't, I'm not sure if that was the kind of beginnings of your foray into that as a solo artist or not. Could you help me trace back the steps of that? Was that
yeah,
sort of like, yeah.
yeah. The Bay Area at that time was just a remarkable, remarkable area. There was so much
Mm,
interesting music going on. A lot of jazz, uh, and of course, the birth of rock and roll. I mean, you had Van Morrison, and living down the street was Carlos Santana, and then the Grateful Dead was around the corner, and I mean, the list goes on and on. Tom Petty was living there for a while. I mean, it was just like all this incredibly amazing Starship. I mean, the list is long, and they were
yeah.
all centered around San Francisco, and I got to meet and play with a lot of them. Um, but I was also doing, Dave Liebman had moved out there, so I was in a quartet with Dave Liebman, a pianoless quartet, bass, drums, tenor, and trumpet. So I'm also doing that hardcore New York post hard bop stuff. And
Hmm.
I'm playing with Art Landy, who was a tremendous influence on
Right.
me. A remarkable, remarkable musician, of not only a great composer, but a great proponent of free jazz and a great teacher of what improvisation really is. I mean, Art really taught me that a real jazz group shouldn't be someone going up there and playing all the licks they practiced. I mean, what's that
Hmm.
point? He had no patience for that whatsoever. He wanted
Hmm.
3, 4, 5 people in a room who were going to listen to each other.
Hmm.
And they weren't going to play anything unless they knew exactly what else everybody was doing. And you could really play as an ensemble through things and create brand new things. And he was a tremendous, well, first teacher. And then about a year later, he thought I was good enough, and he actually asked me to be in the band. And we had a
Wow.
band for like 12 years. And
Now,
we
I
toured.
knew that you came out of that. Sorry to interrupt, Mark, but
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
was Doug, was our dear late friend Doug Lunn involved in that as well? at
Doug
that
was a
time?
friend. He was never in the band, but
Okay.
that's where I first met Doug, because he studied from Art as well. I think the
Right.
thing was Doug was an electric bass player, and Art
Mhm.
always wanted an acoustic bass player. I think this Doug's sensibility, why I ended up playing with Doug for 25 years, was because he came out of that same world, and his sensibility of
Yeah.
always listening, always finding the perfect thing for your instrument to do at the time that it needs to be done. That's why I love Doug. I mean, literally, he was my bass player for 20, 25 years. I mean, there
Mhm.
was really very few other players I would want to play with. Um,
Yeah.
but that all came out of Art, and so I'm playing on a Jerry Garcia record. I'm playing with Van Morrison, but I even did a stint with the Beach Boys. God help me. Um, but I'm working with Art, and we're touring Europe, and we're playing jazz cellar clubs all throughout Europe. So I have this wide range of experience going on and learning. And I think there was a core of us that formed a little band that was never really a band, but it was Terry Bozzio, Pat O'Hearn, and Peter Maunu, and myself. And it came out of Peter being a violin student of my mother's, and he would come upstairs to my room after having his lesson with my mother, and we listened to John Coltrane together. And of course,
Amazing.
Peter is a wonderful violinist, but he's a great guitar player, you know.
Yeah.
And so we met Pat when he moved to the Bay Area, and Terry had I had met in high school, and we had this
Okay.
same sensibility about music. And I remember when the first Weather Report record came out, the 4 of us sort of got together and just said, "Let's just play. Let's," and we tried various different things, and we would play in each other's living rooms, and we would, challenge each other, and eh, it was another my other big learning experience was just playing with those guys. They were so good at their instruments, and they had, of course, drums, bass, and guitar. Those were very valuable instruments to other players. So Terry was working with Malo and uh, Carlos, and then of course with Zappa. Peter was working with Jean-Luc Ponty. Pat was doing more of the jazz thing with Joe Henderson and a lot. And I'm the trumpet player, and I'm playing hotel gigs because there's no real main big jazz touring thing that's looking for trumpet players. I did get the gig with
Mhm.
Horace Silver for a brief period, but that was really the
Mhm.
only trumpet player gig around that was looking for outside players. If I'd gone to New York, maybe I could have done the Art Blakey route, but I never did. I loved the diversity of the San Francisco experience. I was in the Sons of Champlin. I played in a lot of
Wow.
different types of bands. So
I'll say,
I had this idea that there should be a band with the sensibility of Weather Report, but that I could be the Miles like voice in that band, but that we'd have a little more of a rough edge because we would have a guitar in it, guitar and electric bass. And so, of course, that was Peter, Pat, and Terry, and myself. And so I started making demos. I started taking my hard earned money and doing weird gigs for studio owners and say, I'll do transcriptions of all your stuff. Just give me 4 hours of recording time. So, and I put together a demo of what my vision was. And I went back and listened to it the other day. And there's parts of it that aren't bad. There's parts of it that I kind of cringe about. But it did,
uh, it's
as
hard to
you
believe.
say, there was a sort of a unique vision there. It was just you could tell what the influences were, but you could also tell that there was something slightly different germinating there. And that I got ended up getting a record deal, ended up being able to hire those guys to come and play on the record. And that was Group 87.
Amazing. So all of this, I mean, that vision that you had that you brought to life was also, something that, was seminal, like so much other music that had come up, that we were all exposed to at that time, not just Miles, but Weather Report that you mentioned and Mahavishnu and Superfunk coming out of the Bay Area and just on and on and on and on. Do you, I mean, this may seem like a little tangential because I want to stay on track here, but do you feel that in a broad sense that uh, those days have gone by now forever?
I haven't seen a decade like the '70s, in my humble opinion, since. Now, that may be that there's a lot of types of music that I just don't respond to as well, and I don't the same sort of growth and creativity I don't recognize as much because I don't personally have the connection to it.
Mhm.
Uh, but for me, to see what David Bowie created in the '70s, what you know, in both rock and alternative music and classical music and certainly jazz, the '70s were just a gold mine. I mean, I still go back and,
Mhm.
just joyfully re-experience so much of the creative innovation of that particular decade. I
Sure.
really do.
Yeah.
And I
Yeah,
like to
I could
think that it's occurred since in various other genres, and maybe it has, that I'm just not as emotionally invested in. But for me, that was, and perhaps because I was part of it. I was a little in my own corner, being contributing in my own small way to that, and certainly being influenced tremendously by all of that music.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, yeah, I'm sure that, I mean, I think that there was a whole wave that spanned, uh, you know, at least a couple, if not several decades. And it was just like a wave of creativity and new things that just occurred. And, now I mean, I think that there's definitely an exploratory spirit that has given birth to some things that seem somewhat new perhaps or novel, but I think just as my 2 cents here, it seems that it's gone towards developing specific types of virtuosity on instruments. Whereas I think that the idea before as an instrumentalist seemed to be to develop, enough skill coupled with your intuitive capacity and creative sort of mind to be able to express certain kinds of music or to try to find new vistas. In other
Yeah.
words, it's like it's the other way around. I mean, it seems to be a little myopic now, but I don't want to, lean on that too much because I may be telling some things short. But I myself as well, I'm kind of stuck in a kind of a time loop between, I don't know, maybe 1963 and 1978, It's just yeah, I mean, it's just there was but and, not only that, but it's real easy to say, "Oh, well, it's because we're a certain age and well, my parents said the same thing. What's that garbage you're listening to?" It's like
Yeah.
I don't think it's as simple as that. I think that we've seen so much evolution just in the 20th century alone. If we just, you know, not only just in the classical world, but in the sort of jazz and pop worlds. I mean, gone from swing to bebop to post bop to avant-garde to fusion to, and beyond. I mean, it's at a certain point, it's kind of like, well, where do we go now?
Yeah.
And yeah, and I mean, I don't know if that's something that's ever you've ever kind of contemplated or not, but so as a composer, I'm sort of wondering how you've gotten into. I mean, you're one of the most prolific film composers there are, and I want to sort of touch on that because I know that, you have always been a representative of music for music's sake and art for art's sake. And so I'm sort of wondering how uh, you first got into, film composing and how you approached it from your entire musical background. There's a lot of things I'm trying to sort of garner here, and to see how it informed your film composing and vice versa. So
Yeah.
how did you get into this? How did you get into all of that?
I think I've always had a fascination to a certain degree with programmatic music, music that tells a story, and that In the classical world, all you have to do is sort of assign the right title to a piece of music, and all of a sudden you can
Mhm.
see those pictures. You know, Vivaldi called it the Four Seasons, and all of a sudden, oh yeah, I hear that in there. You know, and of course he would construct it to be heard.
Right.
But if you didn't have that title, would you ever know that it was the Four Seasons? I don't know. You know, but I love the fact that composers would pick a title. You know, Debussy, La Mer. I mean, it's throughout the whole canon of Western music that composers have fooled around with that. And then you get into the 20th century where, you know, Hollywood asks for the music to help tell the story. And the beginning of that, of course, was sort of generic, just dramatic music, and it was going all the time. But as the genre, film genre developed, you know, you actually, the composer could start to really be a storyteller, a real helpful storyteller with nuance and change and pace and theme and character development. And I always appreciated that from afar, but it never really thought that that would be something I would do for a living. And I was just making music, trying to get the next record deal, trying to keep the rent paid, you know, and just loving what I was doing. And I made a series of pieces with an old friend of mine, another fabulous bassist, Bill Douglas. And we made a beautiful demo of 3 pieces for, and he was playing all his Chinese, he played traditional Chinese instruments besides the acoustic bass. And we did this thing together, hoping to get a deal with Manfred Eicher on the new music series. And Manfred turned us down. And so what do?
Oh, wow.
I looked at the bank account and I saw, I think I had $217 in there. And so I went down to the local cassette store and bought a cassette duplicating machine and a box of 100 cassettes. Spent like $199 or something. So, and went home and made 100 copies of this piece of music that Bill and I had written and sent it out to 100 people. And then I said, well, that's as much as I can do. Thank you very much. Let's find the next gig. And that tape, oh, I sent like 50 to Bill. I said, you know, 50 of your friends get this too. Well, Bill sent one of those tapes to a graphic artist friend of his. That graphic artist was doing the graphic art for a poster for a film, a Hollywood film. The director for that film came to his house to look at the first draft of that poster art. And the guy had it out and he said, and the guy said, oh, no, you need to change this, you need to change this. I don't change this. What the hell is that music you're playing in the background? And he said, oh, that's my friend Bill. He plays the Chinese flutes and stuff. Oh, you remember him? He played on Black Stallion. He played all the flutes on Black Stallion because Billy had played the Chinese flutes in the studios. And the guy said, yeah, but what's all that other stuff? The flute's beautiful, but who's doing the rest of it? He said, oh, this is a guy named Mark Isham. Well, he wrote my name down and he had his producer find me and he basically gave the opportunity to audition to score his film. And I'd never scored a film before. I hadn't the faintest idea what I was doing, but I knew this was the opportunity of a lifetime. You know, not because I'd been trying to get in the door, but just because I knew what it meant to get in any door whatsoever. It took me years to get in a record company door. And I said, well, film's got to be just as hard. So why the hell not? Let me just, and I poured my heart and soul into that demo and I got the gig. So all of a sudden I'm a kid with no experience scoring a film, being asked to score a major Disney film. And fortunately, there were 2 music editors on the project who were both exceedingly gracious, and they helped me and they guided me through the process. And I got through it, and it started me on that path. And I look back on it after, I wasn't thinking like this when I was doing it, but you know, a month after, so I'm sitting there and I look at my bank account. I had more money in it because of that film than I'd had ever playing jazz. And I had the sense of really having accomplished something, something new, something different, something really challenging to me and something really rewarding to me. But I didn't know what to do. So I was back playing. I went back and was playing with Van Morrison. We did another tour of Europe and then Van said, I'm doing this new record, and we rehearsed it and it was all R&B. Now I love Van, and Van is still a dear friend of mine. But at that point in my life, I did not feel that I wanted to be the trumpet player in an R&B band. I just didn't, because I had done things with Van that were way beyond that, that were really fun and really experimental and interesting. And I said, I just owe it to myself to, I've done a film score. I owe it to myself to explore some other options. So I went back to America and I started to work with Windham Hill and I made a record for Windham Hill. And Windham Hill said, well, we're going to sign all of you artists on Windham Hill to a touring gig if you want it. We're going to LA and we're going to go meet major agency. And I went down there and I met them for touring and they sound fine. And then this young guy came rushing in at the end of the meeting and said, is Mark Isham here? Is Mark Isham here? I said, yeah, hi, Mark. He said, I'm Brian Laux and I'm a film agent and I want to represent you. I saw your film. It was fantastic. I want to represent you. So all of a sudden I had a Hollywood agent. So I have to admit, the two hardest things that any composer have to face in any career is to get that first gig and to get an agent. And both of those were sort of handed to me just by being who I was, by doing what I do and letting people know about it. And that
That's
sort of
amazing.
started me on the film career. It really did. And Brian was a brand new agent. He was as green as I was. So consequently, we both worked our ass off. And he is now, we ended up going to CAA. He's now one of the top senior agents at CAA and probably retiring. And I've had the career I've had.
Unbelievable.
Yeah.
That's what a story, Mark. That's an incredible
Yeah.
story. What was that first film, by the way?
It was called Never Cry Wolf. And it was directed by Carol
Right.
Ballard. And boy, that film stands the test of time. I watched it the other day and it's still just one of the most beautiful films ever made.
Yeah, absolutely. When you said Disney, it threw me because I
No.
didn't associate it with it. Right. Never Cried Wolf.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so it kind of snowballed from there. So you said you had a couple of music editors help you in the process. So
Yeah.
tell me, so you dove in, now you're seeing the footage, you're getting the story, and you're just got to let it rip, right? And so not only do you have to sort of you have a blank canvas musically, but you had no idea how to do this. So the music editors sort of, did they help you with the process, saying, listen, here's how you do it. You have to, in terms of matching things to, because I'm sure, I mean, back in those days, I'm not sure exactly how you did that, but the process has changed quite a bit since then.
Oh, hugely,
I mean,
hugely.
in
Yeah.
terms of the digital domain and all that sort of stuff is
Yeah.
what I mean. So,
Well, this is computers were still something sitting in a Stanford, experiment lab.
yeah,
There's no such
yeah,
thing as a
right,
home
right,
computer, right? Much less a
yeah,
computer that could take a music program. I mean,
sure,
so how did I write music in those days? I had a Fender Rhodes. I bought myself a Fender Rhodes. I had inherited my grandmother's acoustic piano. So, and I had my trumpet. And I would sit at pick up these three instruments, and I bought just a simple quarter-inch tape machine. And I would just put ideas down on tape and splice the tape and write stuff out on paper. And my compositional process was from the traditional to the Eno-esque. In other words, I could write, if I worked at the piano and worked out chord progressions and melodies, I could write all that down. But if I wanted to sort of break out, I could put stuff on tape and cut it up. And I was familiar enough with modern compositional techniques and using tape recorder as a compositional tool that I would
hmm
fool around with that as well. So I get offered this film and I have to write, an hour and a half of music. And I have, well, at least the good news is they didn't give me any time frame. Which was great. It was still tremendous pressure, though. I knew I had to deliver. So I just said, look, I need a room and a tape recorder. And they were fantastic. They stuck me in a room with an 8-track tape recorder, which was more tracks than I'd personally ever had before. So now I could actually start to build music using the tape recorder as an instrument. And you know this better than anybody. In the 70s, multi-track tape recorders were starting to be around. And in the pop world, they were becoming the tool, right? That was how a lot of pop records were made. You would put down a number of tracks, then you'd overdub, then you'd erase, and it became a tool for experimenting how to get a piece of music finished. And I was
hmm
a child of that generation, and I built that score on an 8-track tape machine with a Prophet 5 synthesizer.
right. I was about to say, yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. That was really a hallmark of
yeah.
the Prophet. Was beautiful, beautiful.
Yeah, and the music editors would then help me as I went. They they were more traditionalists, right? So they were, I think, confused by my process. So they couldn't really step
Mhm.
in as I was doing my thing. But after
Mhm.
I got maybe 90 seconds of music down and we played it to picture, they would say, well, that bit there would be great if it were 10 seconds earlier, right?
I see.
So we would cut
Okay.
the tape and make it 10 seconds earlier. And then say, but if you took that other section, did something like that as it continues, and so I would do that, and then we would redo the thing where they'd had to cut the tape, and then all of a sudden you got like a minute and a half of, ooh, that's actually pretty good film music, you know, because
Right.
they knew the way that music responds to storytelling, and that what storytelling asks of music to do, and what music is capable of doing for storytelling.
Mhm.
I have to give myself a certain amount of credit. I had good instinct for that as well. I knew
Sure.
kind of the way to program the synthesizer, the type of sounds to use, the type of composition to use. But they were so patient in helping me use the studio and use their knowledge. And then when it came time to do the final product, to help with the mixing, and we did some overdubs of acoustic instruments, and they helped with the orchestrations and all of that.
Mhm.
So I would have been floundering without their sort of guidance as we went. But I did bring
Mhm.
my own idiosyncratic, rather iconoclastic way of working and point of view to the whole thing, and they helped me realize that. So it's kind of a unique sounding score even to this day, and I think it's because I hadn't the faintest idea what the hell I was doing. Except that I could just
Okay.
trust my gut, trust my instinct, and trust
Yeah,
my
sure.
artistic sensibility,
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I often wonder when you get asked to score a film and you see it, you're going in with a blank slate and you know, it's too simplistic to say what exactly informs you to begin carving out a concept for it because sometimes it's going to be a lot of like taiko drums and a lot of versus, you know, electronica or whatever it is. I mean, I often wonder about what it is that you know gives you that germ of an idea to go, well, it's going to be here, and also what you do if you turn it in and they don't like it,
Ah.
what happens then? There's that,
Well, there is that. There is that. I mean, that's so to
which I'm
handle
sure
the
hasn't happened with you that much, if at all.
well, no, it's happened. It definitely has happened. The key to that is to not get too far down the road without getting agreement that you're on the right path.
Hmm.
Um, and I think I did it instinctually. Well, Carol, the director, would come by like every other night and listen to the day's work because he knew he'd hired a kid that had the faintest idea what he was doing, and that he himself would be in trouble if I screwed up. He would have to start all over again with somebody he didn't really want, because by that time I think the studio would have just taken it away from him and said, we're going to hire somebody we know is going to finish this damn film, because he was already like a year late in getting this film done. So
Hmm.
he took a great deal of responsibility for me personally being there and me getting what he wanted, so that he could then say to the studio, no, this is exactly what I want, and leave us alone. So he was fabulous in that respect. And what it
Okay.
taught me with him was that he checked on me, regularly. And so that when something was good, he would say, that's good. Now finish it like this and then move on. So that by the time we're 3 or 4 weeks into this thing, we know what's working. We know what he likes. We know what he loves. And that we know that we can confidently carry on together. So I've
Hmm.
taken that sort of as a rule of thumb ever since. And if I start a project, I will pick, I think, the 15 or 20 minutes of the score, sometimes not as much, maybe 10 minutes, that I think are really going to define this score. They're really going to, like, if there's a big theme, or if there's a big moment at the end that really the music has to step up and do a big job, I'll just
Hmm.
dive headfirst into that and just say, all right, let me show everybody what I think this is.
Okay.
And I'll have them come like 10 days or 2 weeks later and play that for them and say, this is this is this is kind of what your score is going to be if you agree. And we'll know at that point. We'll know, they go, oh, that's fantastic. Carry on. And I'll never forget. I was doing a Jodie Foster film, and I had done 2 films with her before, and she had been lovely. Everything was loved on the first pass, and
Mhm.
she came in on this film, and I played her these 10 minutes, and she said, "Mark, I just don't think that's right."
Hmm.
And we discussed what I had done and why I had done it, and she actually said, "Well, I think you've probably done that, but I don't think that's what the film really needs. I think we have to rethink what the music should do here." And so I took another 2 pages of notes on that conversation, and I just started again. And the next
Mhm.
time it was right. So it's sort of just it's a practical matter that you give yourself a really good shot at getting it right or wrong so that you have time to
Mhm.
correct it if it's wrong. And
Right. Well, did when
I
she
actually had a time when a studio heard the score and they said, "Oh, we hate that. Fire him.
really?
Fire him." And they fired me. And the agent said, "Yeah, they're firing you." I said, "Why?" They said, "They hate the score." I said, "Well, this is ridiculous. This is the first time I've ever even talked to the studio and they hate it. Well, I need to know why. First of all, they can hire somebody, but the person won't have the experience of having done something wrong or right yet. I'm already a mile ahead of anybody else you're going to hire. I have a lot of
Mhm.
experience." And I actually called the head of the studio to tell them that. He, of course, would not take my call, but his
Ugh.
underling took the call. And I explained to him, "Look, this, of course, is not my first film by this time." I said, "I'm a very experienced composer. I can do whatever you want. You just have to tell me what you want. If that's not what you want, so be it. We won't do that. But I'm way ahead of anybody else you could hire. Just let me take another shot at it." And he did. They rescinded the firing.
Wow, good.
Yeah.
A
Which
good
brings me
move on
to the
his
big
behalf.
which brings me to the biggest point about, well, life in general, but I think it especially is true in the film business. It's all about communication.
Mm.
Being able to talk to people and express yourself rationally and clearly and be able to accept their communication to you rationally and clearly and have an honest, fruitful back and forth so that you really can
Mhm.
get forward motion in whatever relationship it is. I mean, it goes it's a life thing, but boy, does it make all the difference in the world in the film industry, I can tell you that.
So, yeah, that's something else. I mean, so let me ask you something, Mark. You know, there's a couple of things I want to ask. First of all, do you think that the more widespread use of electronica in terms of effects and just sort of more abstraction has informed film composing to the point where you feel that you have to sort of lean that way? And what I mean to say is, and I need to word this carefully because you're you know, virtuosic in terms of your usage of electronics and contextually how you you sort of incorporate it in a wide musical setting. But what I mean is, you know, do you see a trend happening whereby it's sort of like, you know, drifting more towards just electronic abstraction, number one, and two, do you feel swept away by that tide?
Well, I've been fascinated to me, the beauty of electronic music is that it's sort of infinite. Theoretically, it's infinite. You can create a world of sound that you've never heard before.
Mhm.
And that's why I was drawn to it in the mid '70s when I first heard of it, and I first heard it, and I first put my hands
Yeah,
on a couple of instruments that could do it, and
yeah.
I've been fascinated ever since, and if you look at the back, you won't see it on this picture, but if people look at my studio, they see tens of thousands of dollars and many years of collecting of these instruments because I love them. And I
Mhm.
love the fact that they're sort of like that rock that has a tiger buried in there somewhere. You just take away everything and there's the tiger. Uh,
Yeah.
they're sitting there and they're doing things and you tweak something to find something unique and wonderful.
Okay.
Uh,
So yes, but here's the thing: is that's you doing it, and when you do that, coming from you know the deep well of musical information and experience and sort of compositional and creative sensibilities that you have innately and in a developed sense, dare I say it's gonna come out a little different than someone who probably isn't as developed, but it gets around a bunch of electronica and, is kind of leaning on that in lieu of compositional vehicles that would involve harmony and things like that to elicit mood. Does that make more sense?
Yeah, I know what you're getting at.
Yeah.
The advent of computers into music has been an interesting cultural phenomenon. It's become a
Yeah.
great tool, and for people like me who were doing all of this before the computer was ever conceived that could be in your living room, much less in the palm of your hand, it's a great tool. Now I look at my kids, and people younger than my kids who've grown up with a laptop and they can open up GarageBand, and within 5 minutes they can put together a piece of music, and they don't really have to know much about music. Uh, Pre-built bass, pre-built drums, pre-built chords, pre-built everything are already available. It's like it's AI has just brought this even more to the front as a question.
Mhm.
You know,
Yeah, I was gonna
electronic
get to that.
Yeah, electronics and the use of computers in art in general. Now the designers are actually asking them to create uh, on its own within its own language.
Mhm.
I still think that you're only going to get the average of what that is going to be.
And so, yeah, I mean, we're talking about AI, and as I was saying before, you know, just as a continuation of this, that it seems to me, because of the seeming deficit of, I don't know, harmonic compositional content in the midst of all of this, technological wizardry. I mean, AI probably wouldn't have much of a job to do, but I think it's been underestimated. And one of the things to be wary of, I mean, I think is, in terms of AI in general, is probably our identity being at stake. And but without getting into it tangential here, do you think that there's like a sort of a deficit which sounds like too much is being reliant on technology, and the sort of just kind of abstract noise making, in lieu of traditional things that would elicit emotions like, you know, really strong harmonies coupled with orchestrations that would really, really, really,
Yeah.
are emotive. Yeah. Yeah, is the question really. So,
Well, I think there's several aspects to that question. One of them is just cultural trends. I mean, you can see it if you track music, the sound of music through history. The 20th century was a big turning point. You had Mahler and Wagner and Strauss all hitting the turn of the century with these huge, huge, compositions for hundreds and hundreds of people. I mean, what one of them wrote the Symphony of a Thousand. It was actually said we need 1,000 people to perform this piece, and huge, magnificent harmonies, and they were stretching traditional harmony to its bounds. And then, the 12-tone guy said, "Well, to hell with that. We need a whole nother approach." And all of a sudden, this sort of dissonance and popped up, and that became cool and hip. And I'm not sure that culturally we've had such a disparity between intellectual coolness and intellectual hipness and popular culture. Historically, I don't know if it's ever really existed like it has. You have I'll pick on some people, but you have Webern and Schoenberg on one side and Taylor Swift on the other. I mean, that's a pretty disparate difference between the accepted musical languages,
quite possible, isn't it? It's a
and
great
Taylor Swift
canyon.
Taylor Swift fans aren't going to listen to Webern and Schoenberg, and the people that still champion that type of approach to composition, and that music should reject the past and should only be about the brand new. And the problem with the brand new is that the emotion of it is in a very little tiny band, you know. God bless Taylor Swift. She speaks the emotional language of a huge section of the population of the world today. So there's great value in that, because art is communication, and she communicates. And the purely only the new is acceptable, only the brand new, only the what was never done before is acceptable, yielded this sort of antagonistic music that really turned people off to classical music. What I see is exciting right now is there's a response to that over the last 30 or 40 years.
Mhm.
Yeah, you had people like Stravinsky leading the way, and Duke Ellington perhaps would have picked up that mantle. Let's find ways of being emotionally engaging, keep some of the traditions of the past alive, but let's explore new sounds and music. But let's stay connected to the audience. Let's find a way to stay connected. And
Yeah,
I think you find that today. I'm very excited about it. I mean, I look to John Adams as one of the composers that really does that. I mean, he knows music like you can
sure.
tell in his composition. He is so well educated, and he confronts head on, the use of modern musical language and still communicate. And I think the great pop artists, that can do that, those are the people that I admire the most, those
Sure.
that can sort of create a new language and yet still find that 5,000,000 people respond. I
Yeah, I
think that's
just
a
wonder.
really
Yeah.
great moment in artistry.
Yeah, I just wonder if it's being done now. I just remember many times when it seemed to have been done, I mean, this is really, really a tight high this is packed with a lot of stuff. It's like, first of all, we're musicians talking about this. The public doesn't think the way that we do, and they don't perceive the way that we do. They're not even thinking about this question. And when
Right.
you talk about, how Taylor Swift is communicating to a lot of people, and good for her, and art is communication, then you could rightfully call that art. Number one, that's just logic, a logical syllogism, right?
Yeah.
Art 101. If then, but at the same time, it's kind of like, is that a reflection of the zeitgeist of culture? And because we're not really hearing, this kind of thing where you just spoke of, whereby something's being inserted into this, like for example, Devo, 40 years ago or in the late 70s when they first emerged, were they appealed to pop culture and Joe Q public. But you could also say that it was different and there was an appeal to musicians as well. You know what I mean? And we could
Absolutely.
see how they were inserting some kind of, yeah. And
Yeah.
and also I remember, I think it was in the 80s, there was a singer, if my memory serves me correctly, called Nina Hagen,
Yeah.
who I believe was an opera singer that was singing punk. So there you have this marriage of, and obviously she knew what she was doing, being operatically trained, and then turning around and singing punk. So there's this, marriage of these two idioms. And so, that's all in the spirit of exploration, kind of like jazz, Coltrane, or, people trying to find expand the vistas of idioms and blending them. And I just wonder if that's even happening now, versus there being a lot of derivative stuff. And I don't mean to shortchange anybody by saying this, saying, well, it's all been done. I'm just saying that, that's a tough thing to deal with because we're musicians. And, again, if that's if this amount of mass appeal on that pop level, you know, deserve a of respect because a lot of people are being reached and a lot of people like, that kind of music or whatever it is. It's like if that's reflective of the zeitgeist and there's a deficit there, then that's something, that's revealing. You know what I'm
Yeah.
saying?
I yeah, and you've gone to the next point of this whole thing is just it's just the awareness, cultural awareness of the planet and the society as a whole. What how it to appreciate most of the time to appreciate more intricacy in communication. It requires a higher level of education. It requires a higher level of experience.
Mhm.
of exposure to different types of communication, different types of cultures. And we live in an interesting time where you feel that perhaps some of the world is experiencing more of the world due to technology, due to the internet. But then you also get the sense that a lot of it's not using that to to do that. You find education probably in the worst condition it's ever been historically in terms of people just learning about learning things. It's you could discuss this subject endlessly because my attention then goes to like a few years ago. I was doing a film and I was writing a score very much in the style that I thought the director really liked. And he did. He really liked it. And he said, what would make this perfect if you just take the melody out? And I said, okay. So, I'm in the studio in the composition phase. I can do that for a director. I can open up the work, template and make some adjustments.
Mhm.
And he said, yeah, that's perfect. So this is an intelligent guy. This is a guy who knows a lot about music, knows a lot about film, but there's something in the aesthetic that is being built in the film community and the filmmaker community that they don't want that competition perhaps, or they don't that want the much emotion on their sleeve. They want it vaguer. They want it. So some of this I think that you're referring to is taste and a cultural expansion
Mhm.
into different types of approaches.
Mhm.
But then I
Oh.
also got to just make a point here, and I don't mean this in a derogatory way, but music has become very consumer friendly. The creation of music has become very consumer friendly, right? If you buy GarageBand, which comes free on any Apple computer now, and you buy a couple of loop packs
Mhm.
with no musical training whatsoever, in an afternoon, you can put together a couple of songs. That's never happened before in our culture,
No.
Now, that system is going to be very similar to what's happening with AI because what is it? It's basing the final creation on other people's creations, and you're simply telling this to go along with this to go along with this. Now, if you pick three things that create something that has never been heard of before and it is the most magnificent thing in the whole universe, well, God bless you. This tool is working for you and you're creating great art with it. But it does open the door for just a lot of stuff out there, a lot of creations that haven't gone necessarily through the rigors of an experienced creator to reach it to the public eye, to the public ear. And this might be partially what you're referring to as well. Just there's a lot of, and AI, of course, feeds right into this. AI is
Right.
so good for popular music, because it is popular and because it can make people a lot of money, it's been formulaized, that you can sit down and you can read the 8 rules of a great pop song very easily defined by any number of great producers over the
Yeah.
producers and writers over the years, and
Right.
you feed that into a machine and it has access to every great pop song ever written. Of course, it's going to come up with something that's impressive.
Sure.
You know, you
Yeah,
but
exactly,
is
and
it
think
really
about it.
going to be new? No, it's not. It's
No,
going to be
it's not.
the averagization, if there is such a word,
Yeah,
of
yeah. Sure.
of everything that it has, everything
Right.
that it has access to. I
Exactly.
guarantee you that if you take something that has not been quantified and qualified, a subject that has not been quantified and qualified so much as pop music, that doesn't have formulas that are agreed upon,
Mhm.
AI is gonna not be worth much of a shit.
There you go, and so it's like, if you're gonna be that formulaic and that algorithmic, like, "Oh, I've got the formula, let's just churn this stuff out." It's AI is gonna turn around and bite you in the behind, you know? And it's
Yeah.
like, "Okay, that's what you get." But
Yeah.
and that's a great point, Mark. Very good point, and it's a great point you made about, the director that said, "Just take the melody out," because, in as much as I was sitting here going, "Wait a second, where's this deficit of harmonic and melodic content?" I can also see the other side of the coin whereby, you know, first of all, people latch on to melodies. They really do. That stuff can, that's, I think those are probably, that's the biggest driver of an earworm. Or,
Yeah.
like I've talked about many times where people with Alzheimer's, they can't remember their name or what they've had for lunch. They don't even remember your name. You start singing their favorite song, and the combination of those lyrics and melody, just it comes back to them. So maybe getting rid of the melody just puts him in, puts that picture into more of a sort of just raw emotion driven by some harmony and textures that are just, you know what I mean?
Yeah,
So that you don't get caught up humming a melody like you would hum a jingle,
yeah,
or something. You know?
yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. These things, yeah, it's all of these things. Because I was just thinking, like, at the turn of the last century, let's say the 1880s, 90s, pop songs were what the latest opera composer had written. People would rush to the opera to hear the latest opera, and within that opera, there'd be the 3 new singles, right?
Mhm.
Those would be the 3 singles that now defined that city's culture for the next few months until the next opera came out, and there was a couple more singles, you know?
Okay.
And all of those were like, "Oh, just heart on your sleeve," just like,
Yeah.
now that won't fly anymore.
Oh,
It's
right.
Pavarotti has a career as he's representing the past, and you get to experience the past, but that's not
Yeah.
gonna fly on the radio. That level of emotional expression is now off limits, it just doesn't fly. I mean, some of the great pop singers, I mean, like the Streisands and the Celine Dions of the world, they can get away with it occasionally,
Mhm.
with the right song. Whitney Houston, I think of. But boy, it's hard to find people right. Adele, perhaps, but that's the artist just saying, "To hell with it. I'm gonna give this to you." And their artistry rises above. You can't talk to a single record executive this day that say, "That's the sort of song you should write."
Mm. Okay.
Yeah.
Wow.
You know?
Wow. Yeah.
So it's
Yeah.
part of it is just a cultural
Mhm.
agreement that we've gone into, "This is cool.
Right.
This is now the way it should be. This is what I like."
Right.
And 100 years from now, who knows what that will be? Maybe it'll turn back around again.
Yeah, maybe. And, you and I were talking about this once, but, on that level, I would like to ask you if, like, for example, you know, some movies have just inserted things like, Penderecki and Ligeti in the movies, and, if people were to hear that stuff on its own, what would they think? You know what I mean? If it wasn't coupled with, and I remember you and I talked about this, and you were saying, well, you actually were bold enough to say, "Hey, the great John Williams, greatest of all time," that Star Wars, if people just heard that and it was decoupled from the film, that it may not have the same impact as well. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah,
I don't think it would. I do know for sure that the serious music community would listen to it and say, "Oh, this John, what are you doing? This is throwback. This isn't even good Mahler." But you couple it to storytelling, and it's a work of genius, true genius. I think that's what people are attracted to film music by, because film music, you can break those rules. You can tell
Mhm.
the serious film music community to go F themselves, because what's gonna tell a good story is picking the right genre of music to help tell that story. And if it's, late 19th century heroic fanfare music, well, then that's what it is, you know? Music
Okay.
critics be damned, you know?
Exactly, right, and therefore, the stories of our times, of the current times that are being told, could rightfully be said that the music that is accompanying it, the delivery of it is the right stuff, I guess.
Absolutely,
It's so
absolutely.
the
It's
zeitgeist again.
Yeah, it's the quality of the emotion that you're trying, there's a lot of emotions, and you mentioned Penderecki,
Yeah.
um, a lot of that music, if you listen to it without any, programmatic context, right? What emotion do you feel? Well, quite frankly, you feel terror, you feel alienation, you certainly don't feel happy. You also feel like, you feel like hugging your dog out for comfort afterward,
Yeah, it's
you know?
scary.
It's
Yeah,
scary. So, quite naturally, it goes perfectly in that sort of film storytelling,
sure.
and it's a great vocabulary to have as a composer, and as a music editor. Obviously, they cut the Penderecki in in films, and it's genius, it's
Mhm,
genius.
mhm. It truly is.
Yeah.
This is great. This is really, really great, insights, and
Yeah.
so informative, Mark. I
Yeah.
mean, honestly, it's I could talk to you forever about this stuff. It's really a bottomless well. Um, so what's coming up for you next? What's next on your plate?
Well, I think you were so kind to join me on a recording of my new album, and,
I can't wait.
well, it's been a little while just for me. To be honest with you, the music business is so different from the last time I put out a record. I've had to sort of rethink my entire thing. I mean, I now have to start my own label. I have to hire publicists. I have to hire marketing people, because the numbers, if you give it to anybody else, the numbers just mean that it's a hobby. It's very expensive hobby.
Yeah.
so, uh, so it's taken me a bit to confront all that and to meet the right people, and I think we're getting closer. The documentary that was made about the making of it is almost done, so I want to time it to be available at the same time. And so, those of you that are listening, just keep your ears and eyes peeled in the next couple of months, and I'll be. The Carousel Club is the name of the first release,
Oh,
and it's
I
good.
had a I had a blast doing it, Mark. It's an amazing record.
Oh, thank you, Vinny. Well, you play so beautifully on it. I was so honored and overjoyed that you could join me on it.
Oh, thanks, Mark. Man, oh man, me too. And yes, please look out for that, everybody.
Mm,
It's going to be an amazing record, and
thank
the
you.
documentary as well. I mean, the
Yeah.
documentary that accompanies it, or that is, the sort of primary delivery vehicle is was will that be on the Scientology network?
It will be. Yeah, it's made by
Mhm.
the folks at SMP,
Great.
who have done this series. It's a very interesting series.
Mm.
I'll be the third episode. It's called oh my god, blanking on the name. I'll remember it in a bit. But Chick Corea did the first one. Stanley Clark's just done one, and I'll be number three. And it's all filmed at Mad Hatter, a very iconic studio that was owned by Chick Corea for a long time and became really sort of the great place to record acoustic pianos in LA for like decades. And you go in there and you look at the piano on the floor there, and everybody, Elton and McCartney, and they've all signed it and done piano overdubs in that studio. It's really a beautifully iconic studio.
It is.
And so we did all the acoustic recording there and mixed it there. Beautiful old Neve console, and
Ugh.
it's yeah. So that'll be yeah. I'll be publishing when that's actually on the air and where to find it.
Excellent, great. We'll all be looking forward to it, Mark, and and everything else that you're doing in the future. And thank you so much for being a guest on this show. I can't thank you enough.
It's my pleasure, Vinny. Always a pleasure to hang out with you and talk about life.
Yeah, amen. Okay. Take care, Mark. Thank
All right.
you.
Bye.
Thanks for listening. Stay tuned for the next episode of Breakfast with Vinny.